but we know that we are being held to a different standard. So, as we discussed with these other police officers whose conduct was inexcusable, if you or I were to defend ourselves in a manner that the state felt unacceptable, we would be prosecuted. And we do see incidents of that. What we would like to see is the police officers not having, the it's this feeling we get from the state. I think our good friend Mike Meharry uses this example. We can hit you, but you can't hit us. You have this feeling that nobody, if we had seen, Alan, if you were kneeling on somebody's neck who was prone, coming in and out of consciousness, somebody could have bashed your head in and it would have been justified because you were killing that person. But what
Mm-hmm.
do the people do when they stood around and watched George Floyd's life being snuffed out from under him? They would have gotten shot. They would have gotten
Mm-hmm.
arrested. There's absolutely no defending. Nobody can stand up and defend these people. Yet you're supposed to comply and settle it in court. Breonna Taylor didn't get to settle anything in court. Daniel Shaver didn't get to settle anything in court. And now we had another one. What was his name now? Dwayne Wright, was that the one?
Yeah,
Um,
Dante, right? Yeah.
Duncan Lemp. We've had
yeah,
Duncan Lemp
and
too.
so, we're seeing this happen again. You cannot defend yourself in court if you never get to court.
So it's funny that you mentioned that. It just reminded me. I know that there was a representative for the prosecution who had made the comment. I don't even think it was in court. I think it was in an interview or in a press conference where they said that indeed there was that on the one hand the prosecution was arguing that no, Officer Chauvin had no reasonable fear for his life from a handful of teenagers in a growing crowd because there were other officers. The officers have all the guns. At that point, George Floyd is handcuffed on the ground. It's ridiculous for them to say, oh, a bunch of screaming teenagers were scaring me, so we killed him. With that said, he brought that up, that yes, I'll fully admit there's a growing crowd. You start to have this mob isn't really the right word because they're not actively engaged in anything per se, but you have this growing audience witnessing this act taking place, and a lot of them have their phones out. They're recording it, which, by the way, that's great. I don't mean to come off as being overly judgmental of people who are filming as opposed to taking part, because we need it on film, don't we? So that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But with that said,
You can get
Suzanne,
tased or shot.
Suzanne, you're
Right?
exactly right that there was a lot of people who would say that, or let me go back. The representative for Floyd, for the prosecution, had said that indeed there was this group of people, but they didn't. They obviously significantly outnumbers the officers on the scene, but they didn't stop Officer Chauvin. They didn't remove him from George Floyd's neck because they still respected the badge, but in that actually in turn meant that some of them were calling the police on the police. There were people on the scene that had called 911 because they were trying to get the police to come stop these policemen that were doing what they were doing. But I get what he was trying to say, whether he was a family representative or one of the prosecutors. I get what he was trying to say, but I reject it wholly. And the reason I do is that it wasn't a group of people don't intervene when they see police brutality taking place. Not because they deep down respect the officer, but really wish they wouldn't do that. It's because they're afraid. Let's call it what it is. People are terrified of the police. And they should be terrified of the police because the police can kill you and get away with it. This is what a huge amount of people in this country genuinely feel, that the police, so Suzanne, you rattled off all those examples right there. Is that of all these examples of instances where the police severely hurt or killed people and ultimately got away with it, or at least have not been prosecuted as of this conversation. And I know, Sherry, you had mentioned Duncan Lemp. In Duncan Lemp's case, hell, they just executed that guy, and that's the end of the story, right?
Yep.
That's perhaps the saddest part of this for most people. Maybe George Floyd's family gets to receive some justice. But for most people, when they get gunned down in a hail of bullets from police, That's the end of the story, you guys. It's over at that point.
Yeah.
Sure, maybe there'll be a little protest and a candlelight vigil, but we move on. We move on until the next one.